If you stepped into a medieval monastery late at night, long after the bells had fallen silent and the halls were swallowed in darkness, you'd witness a sight that feels almost unreal today. Dozens of monks sitting perfectly upright in long wooden choir stalls, sleeping. Their heads bowed, but never fully resting. Their bodies still, but never fully relaxed. Their minds drifting somewhere between prayer and dreaming. Why would anyone choose to sleep like this, night after night, year after year? Tonight, we're stepping quietly into that world to uncover the forgotten reason behind this strange ritual, and the deeper meaning the monks believed it held. Before we begin this journey into the shadows of monastic nights, make sure to subscribe to Whispered History Tales, where the past is retold in gentle whispers designed to calm your mind and help you drift into sleep. The cold stone of the abbey walls held the night like a secret. It was the kind of silence that didn't simply surround you, it pressed into your chest, slowed your breathing, made your heartbeat sound louder than it should. The monks of St. Aldwyn's Abbey were already settled in the choir stalls, arranged in 2 long rows, facing each other like mirrored shadows. The air carried the faint scent of beeswax and old wood. Only one candle burned in the center of the choir, its flame hardly moving. The monks weren't lying down on soft bedding. They weren't stretching out under blankets. They sat tall, backs straight, hands folded on their laps, their cowls draped over their faces so gently that you couldn't tell if they were asleep or deep in silent prayer. This was not a moment of discipline forced upon them. It was devotion woven into their nights, the same way dawn was woven into their prayers. Brother Matthew, a young novice, barely 20 years old, tried not to let his head droop too far forward. This was only his 3rd month at St. Aldwyn's, and the silence of the night still felt heavier than anything he carried during the day. The other monks seemed so effortlessly still, as if the quiet had seeped into their bones long ago. But to Matthew, sitting upright in the wooden stall felt like balancing between 2 worlds. His legs tingled, his shoulders stiffened. His mind drifted first to the cold, then to the darkness, then to the faint rustling of robes as some of the older monks shifted slightly. He wondered, though he would never dare ask aloud, how they did this every night, how they stayed awake enough to pray, yet asleep enough to rest, why they chose discomfort over a warm bed, why silence mattered so much that even their dreams seemed hushed. As the candle flickered, the shadows moved in soft waves along the walls. Brother Anselm, the abbey's oldest monk, sat a few feet away, still as a carved figure. His face, half hidden beneath his hood, carried the lines of a man who had spent his entire life listening to the quiet, listening so hard that he claimed he could hear the difference between a restless thought and a peaceful one. Brother Matthew tried to imitate his posture. He tried to imagine what it would feel like to be so comfortable in silence that sleep came easily, even without a bed. His mind wandered again, this time to something Brother Anselm had told him earlier that day. When we sleep sitting up, Anselm whispered, we remain humble. The body does not sink into indulgence. Our dreams stay close to our prayers, and we remember that rest is a gift, not a guarantee. Matthew had nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood. He wondered what it meant to keep your dreams close to your prayers. He wondered if the monks dreamed differently in this stiff posture. Did they float through visions of angels and scripture? Or did they simply drift in and out of shallow sleep, too tired to dream at all? Tonight, he felt the questions more sharply than usual. The cold bit at his ankles, The wooden stall pressed against his back. His eyelids grew heavy. He resisted the urge to lean forward too far, knowing that falling asleep completely, the way ordinary people did, wasn't allowed here. Instead, monks rested in short, light waves, half prayer, half slumber, letting their minds hover in a peaceful, mindful quiet. It was an ancient practice, rooted in humility and discipline, but Matthew felt something else inside it too, a mystery, a purpose that hadn't yet shown itself to him. He wondered if he would ever grow used to this. If one day he'd sit as still as Brother Anselm, unmoving, untroubled by the cold or the ache or the monotony. If one night he'd slip into a half-dream and feel something sacred blooming in the silence. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts, not loud, not sharp, but enough to stir the still air. A distant bell, one gentle chime signaling the midnight vigil. The monks didn't move at the sound, but Matthew felt a shift run through the room, subtle but present. The vigil was the heart of their night, the reason they kept themselves upright, to be ready, always ready, for prayer in the darkest hours. Matthew inhaled slowly. The cold air filled his chest. He tried to calm the restless flickers of his mind. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness settle behind them like a thick curtain. He didn't know when the drifting began, not quite sleep, not quite meditation, but something suspended in between. His breath slowed, his shoulders eased, the ache dulled, the cold faded. The silence, once a weight, became softer, like a blanket instead of a burden. For the first time since he joined the abbey, he felt the edge of that strange peace the older monks seemed to carry so effortlessly. A warmth, gentle and quiet, began to unfurl inside him. But just as he started to slip deeper into that calm, something else stirred in the darkness. A sound barely audible, like a whisper against stone. Matthew's eyes opened, his pulse quickened. The candle flickered, its flame bending as though something unseen had passed by. He sat a little straighter, breath shallow, because in a place this silent, even the smallest sound felt like a revelation or a warning. The faint whisper of sound drifted through the choir like a thread of cold air, weaving between the wooden stalls and brushing against the edges of Brother Matthew's awareness. He held perfectly still, unsure whether it had been real or merely a trick of his drifting mind. The monks around him didn't react, not even a slight movement beneath their hoods. If they had heard anything, they showed no sign. Matthew swallowed, the sound loud in his own ears. He tried to steady his breathing. The silence returned, deeper now, as though the room itself was listening. The candle flame stilled again, no longer quivering. Perhaps it was nothing, he told himself. The old abbey made sounds would settle. Stone shifted with the cold. Wind crept through cracks, as thin as threads. These things happened. And yet, something about this sound felt different. So soft, it barely existed. Yet so distinct that it seemed to call his attention specifically. Brother Anselm, seated near the center of the choir, lifted his head slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough that Matthew noticed. The old monks who'd shifted just a fraction, as if he too were listening. Matthew felt a ripple of relief. At least he hadn't imagined it entirely. But what was it? He settled again, trying to bring his thoughts back to prayer, letting his breath slow into the rhythm the older monks held naturally. He focused on the simple lines of the Psalms he had learned as a novice. The words drifted like a soft chant inside his mind. Gradually, the tension in his shoulders eased. He let the candlelight blur as his eyes softened, drifting toward that half-sleep state monks valued so much, where the mind stayed awake, but the body rested in gentle surrender. In that haze between waking and dreaming, images began to form. Not sharp, not vivid, but soft shapes moving like shadows behind a thin veil. Matthew didn't control them. They simply drifted into being flickers of cloisters, echoes of chants, the faint outline of a robed figure walking down the abbey's long stone corridor. He felt oddly aware, as though he could sense his own dreaming. Then the sound came again, clearer this time, a soft, deliberate step on stone. Matthew's eyes snapped open. A monk walking at this hour wasn't unusual. The abbey kept watch in shifts, but no footsteps should have sounded inside the choir hall itself. Nobody entered during the night rest, except the cantor at the vigil bell. Brother Matthew looked toward the doorway. It was still closed. Beside him, Brother Eliasa, middle-aged monk with a strong jaw and gentle voice, shifted just slightly. Enough that Matthew knew he had heard the step as well. Matthew's pulse quickened. If the older monks were acknowledging it, even with such tiny movements, then it wasn't just his imagination. Another soft step, closer this time. Matthew's skin prickled, but the candle didn't flicker. The air didn't move. Nothing appeared in the aisle. Just darkness and the faint glow of flame on stone. Matthew tried to steady his breathing again. Perhaps it was nothing more than a fellow monk moving quietly in the adjoining corridor. The abbey often played tricks on the ears at night. He told himself that, but deep down, he felt something else. Not fear, exactly, not yet. More like the stirring of a question he didn't know how to ask. He closed his eyes again, trying to slip back into the flow of quiet prayer, when a voice sounded not loud, not whispered, but clear inside his mind. Stay awake. Matthew jolted upright. His breath caught. His eyes flew open. He looked straight ahead. No one had spoken. All the monks were still sitting upright, heads bowed, lost in their own silent rhythm. The voice had not come from any of them. Yet he had heard it as distinctly as if someone had leaned close to his ear. Matthew's fingers curled slightly on the edge of the choir stall. His heart thudded against his ribs. He tried to swallow, but his throat felt tight. The words rang again in his memory. Stay awake. Was it a warning, a reminder, a trick of a mind half asleep? Brother Anselm slowly turned his head not toward Matthew, but toward the far end of the choir where the shadows pooled thickest. The movement was small, almost invisible beneath his hood, but it told Matthew everything. The old monk had heard something too. The silence stretched out again, long and deep. It pressed into the room like a held breath. Matthew felt every nerve in his body tighten, waiting for something he couldn't name. But nothing came. No voice, no footsteps, no shift of air. Only the faint hum of quiet prayer filling the space like a soft vibration. Gradually, the tension eased again. The monks resumed their gentle drifting in and out of upright rest. Matthew forced himself to settle once more, though the memory of the voice sat heavy inside him. He didn't dare speak. He didn't dare ask. Not now. Not until morning. Instead, he let his eyes close again, leaning into the rhythm of the night with caution and curiosity. He had heard stories, whispers among novices, tales told by travelers, old legends the elders never confirmed, stories about monks who received visions during their upright slumber, stories about voices that echoed through the abbey's darkest hours, stories about something ancient that lingered inside holy places, something that came closest when human minds were quiet and open. Matthew had never believed those stories before. Tonight, he wasn't so sure, because the silence wasn't empty. It felt aware, watching, waiting, listening to them just as they listened to it. And in that uneasy space between dreaming and waking, Brother Matthew sensed the beginning of something he didn't understand. The pale ribbon of dawn had not yet touched the sky when the bell finally sounded, soft at first, like a gentle nudge, then fuller, echoing through the ancient walls of the abbey. The monks stirred with the sound, lifting their heads simultaneously in a smooth, almost practiced motion. Their bodies had grown used to rising from upright rest without complaint, though a few joints cracked faintly in the silence. Brother Matthew eased himself up, grateful for the shift in posture, yet still caught in the lingering fog of whatever he had heard during the night. His legs tingled as the blood returned, and he swallowed against the dryness in his throat. That voice, those footsteps, they pressed on his memory as clearly as if he had heard them a moment ago. The monks filed out of the choir in calm silence, descending the narrow stone steps that led toward the cloister walk. Their sandals scraped softly against the worn limestone, creating a whispering rhythm that felt strangely comforting after the strange stillness of the night. Matthew walked in the midst of them, careful to maintain the proper pace, careful not to let his eyes drift into the darker corners of the abbey, where his imagination had begun to take dangerous liberties. He did notice, however, that Brother Anselm walked just a shade slower than usual, as though listening for something behind them. Outside in the cloister, dawn hadn't yet broken. The sky hung low and dark, tinged only with the faintest hint of gray along the horizon. The cold air brushed Matthew's face like a cool cloth. He let out a slow breath, watching it drift upward in a thin mist. The courtyard was silent, except for the quiet rustle of robes and the distant murmur of wind through the bare branches of the elm tree in the center. The monks moved toward the chapter house, their footsteps echoing gently beneath the stone arches. It was the hour when the abbey stirred itself, awake lamps being lit, kitchens warming, novices hurrying quietly to their duties. But inside the chapter house, where the daily readings and confessions would soon begin, silence still held dominion. As the monks settled into their seats around the circular room, Matthew forced himself to sit straight, though his mind still flicked back to the voice. He could almost hear it, again quiet, deliberate, unmistakable. Stay awake. He tried to push the memory aside. Maybe he had dreamed it. Maybe it was nothing more than the shift between wakefulness and sleep that had played a trick on him. But then why had Brother Anselm looked toward the shadows? Why had Brother Elias stirred as though listening? The abbot entered with his usual calm grace, his robe trailing softly behind him. His presence alone was enough to still even the most restless thoughts among the brothers. Matthew bowed his head deeply as the opening prayer began. Domini, labia, me, apres. The Latin rose like slow incense, curling through the air and settling gently on the hearts of the monks. Matthew joined in, though his voice trembled just slightly on the first line. When the prayer ended, the abbot opened the great wooden book of rules, its pages worn and yellowed from generations of use. But Matthew didn't hear the words. Not fully. His focus drifted as the abbot read the passage on humility, describing the importance of controlling both thoughts and senses. Matthew nodded automatically, but his thoughts circled back to the night's events. After the reading came the moment of quiet reflection. The monks bowed their heads, Silence pressed into the room, thick and gentle. But unlike the choir hall, this silence felt grounded, warm, familiar. It didn't feel alive the way last night's silence had felt. Matthew released a slow breath. Maybe he had misjudged. When the abbot dismissed them, the monks rose to begin their daily tasks. Matthew was assigned to help in the scriptorium that morning, copying the Psalms onto a fresh sheet of parchment. He took his place at the long wooden desk, dipped his quill into ink, and began the slow, careful strokes that required patience and attention. The smell of vellum and oak gall ink settled around him, and for a while he managed to forget. Hours passed beneath the glow of small oil lamps, the gentle scratch of quills forming a soft harmony. Brother Elias worked across from him, a steady presence, with a reputation for both kindness and wisdom. His movements were smooth and practiced, each letter a small work of devotion. But mid-morning, Elias paused. His quill hovered above the parchment. His brow furrowed not in frustration, but in thought. "Brother Matthew," he whispered softly, his voice so low that only Matthew could hear. "Did you notice anything unusual during the night?" Matthew's heart leaped into his throat. He wasn't supposed to speak during work hours, except in necessity. And monks never brought up dreams or strange sensations lightly. The question alone felt like a stone dropped into still water. Matthew leaned slightly forward. "Yes," he whispered, barely audible. "I heard something." Elias's eyes focused sharply on him. "What did you hear?" Matthew hesitated, glancing around to ensure the room remained focused on their work. The other monks kept writing, oblivious. "I heard footsteps," he murmured, "inside the choir, and a voice. Not spoken aloud, but in my mind." Elias didn't react with surprise. Instead, he nodded slow, steady, almost as if he had expected this answer. Matthew felt a shiver run through him. "You heard it too," he whispered. Elias didn't answer immediately. He dipped his quill, drew a slow line on the parchment, then finally whispered, "Some of us have heard it before." Matthew froze. Before he could ask anything more, a shadow passed through the doorway. Brother Anselm entering the scriptorium. He moved with a calm, deliberate pace, but his eyes swept the room in a way Matthew had never noticed before, as though checking for something unseen. Brother Elias straightened instantly, quill poised, silence restored. Matthew swallowed hard. The voice wasn't a dream. The footsteps weren't his imagination. Something was stirring in the abbey, and he had only just begun to understand that the monk's silence wasn't merely a discipline, it was a shield. The bell tolled once deep, slow, and commanding, echoing through the stone corridors, like a summons from another realm. Brother Aidan felt the hum of it through the wooden floorboards beneath his sandals. It was the signal that the sacred vigil was about to begin, a rite so old that even the abbey's oldest manuscripts hinted only fragments of its origins. Aidan tightened the rope belt around his simple wool tunic and gathered his breath. Tonight he wasn't just observing. He was stepping into something the monks had guarded for centuries. He walked toward the vigil hall. Its heavy cedar doors opened just enough to release a thin spill of amber candlelight into the hallway. As he crossed the threshold, a strange silence settled around him. He could feel it more than hear it as if sound had been partially swallowed by the room. The hall was cavernous. Hundreds of beeswax candles flickered in iron candelabras, creating waves of softly trembling gold across the stone walls. The air was warm with their glow, but cool on the skin, scented faintly with frankincense. The monks sat in their upright sleeping chairs, arranged in 2 perfect rows, facing each other. The chairs were tall-backed, carved with meticulous patterns of vines, crosses, and stars designs, meant to keep the mind focused during long hours of contemplation. Brother Oswin motioned for Aidan to take a seat near the front. "Remember," Oswin murmured, barely moving his lips, "stillness is the first doorway, breath is the second. What you encounter after that depends on your readiness." Aidan swallowed hard. He lowered himself onto the wooden seat. The chair forced him into perfect posture, shoulders back, spine straight, chin slightly elevated. It was like sitting inside a carved command. The vigil bell struck again. All at once, every candle in the hall, dim not extinguished, but softened, as though their flames bowed in reverence. The monks closed their eyes, their breathing synchronized, slow enough that Aidan could feel the rhythm through the air. He exhaled. Then Brother Calder, the vigil master, stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box bound in aged leather. It was no larger than a loaf of bread, yet the atmosphere tightened the moment it entered the room. Aidan had seen Calder guard it fiercely during the day, always tucking it into the inner folds of his robe. To see it openly displayed now meant something extraordinary was about to happen. Calder lifted the lid. Inside the box lay a single object, a polished, oval-shaped stone that shimmered deep blue beneath the candlelight. Strange symbols pulsed faintly across its surface. Aidan's chest tightened. He had seen drawings of the vigil stone in manuscripts, but nothing prepared him for the quiet power it radiated. "This," Calder whispered, his voice barely audible, yet somehow resonant in the room, "is the stone of Enoch, passed from monastery to monastery for over 1,000 years. Tonight it will guide your mind into the threshold." Aidan's breath caught the threshold. The mysterious state monks entered during upright sleep meditation. Ancient texts described it as the hinge between waking and the kingdom of inner fire. Fewer than 1 in 50 monks reached it deeply enough to experience visions. Fewer still could remember what they saw. Calder placed the stone on a pedestal between the 2 rows of monks. "When we sleep sitting up," he continued, "we do not descend into dreams the way ordinary people do. Our minds stay alert, balanced in the doorway between 2 worlds. This is how we hear the whispers." Aidan felt goosebumps rise along his arms. "The whispers of what?" he asked softly. Calder turned his gaze toward him. The old monk's eyes were pale but piercing, as if looking through him rather than at him. "Of the divine," Calder said, "of memory, of the ancestors, of truths we are not meant to grasp in daylight." Aidan nodded, pulse quickening. The ceremony began. Calder dimmed every candle but one alone flame burning directly above the vigil stone. Shadows stretched across the hall like slow-moving tides. Each monk tipped his head back slightly, eyelids lowered, breathing more deeply now. Aidan followed their example. At first, he felt nothing but discomfort. His back muscles trembled, his neck ached. The stillness made his thoughts scatter like frightened birds. But then something shifted. It felt like falling inward. His mind steadied, floating in a peculiar calm. The hall brightened behind his closed eyes, as if illuminated from within. His ears rang not painfully, but as if someone had struck a singing bowl made of pure light. Then he heard it, not a voice, but a murmur, a vibration, a hum rising and falling in patterns, almost musical. Aidan's heart thudded. This was it, the whispers. Images flickered across the darkness of his mind. A desert under a silver moon. A monastery built into red cliffs. A monk in ancient robes, carving symbols onto a stone tablet. A star-shaped constellation glowing overhead. A figure kneeling before the shard of a broken pillarit's surface engraved with the same symbols as the vigil stone. The images came faster, pulling him in deeper. He saw a pair of hands lifting the blue stone out of a leather pouch. The hands belonged to someone long dead, an ancient monk whose face was hidden beneath a hood. The stone glowed brighter in his palms, illuminating a circle of monks around him. Then Aiden saw something that froze his breath. A map, not drawn on parchment, but carved into the stone's glowing surface. Lines connecting distant points, symbols marking intersections. At the center, a spiral. Around it, 7 radiating paths. The monk holding the stone whispered something. A single word: custodes, guardians. Before Aiden could grasp the meaning, the world inside his mind fractured like shattered glass. A surge of energy rushed through him so powerfully that he jolted upright, eyes snapping open. The hall was silent again. Every monk stared at him. Calder stepped forward. "You saw something," he said quietly. "I felt it." The stone reacted. Adon's lungs burned with uneven breath. "I saw a map." The room stirred with gasps and whispers. Calder's eyes widened, not with fear, but with awe. "Then the ancient vigil has chosen you." Aiden shook his head. "Chosen me for what?" Calder leaned closer, voice trembling. "To complete a journey we began 4 centuries ago. A journey only one monk has ever returned from manned. He returned half-mad, carrying only the stone of Enoch." Aiden felt everything inside him tilt. "What journey?" Calder touched the glowing stone gently. "The one that leads," he whispered, "to the first monastery. The place where the monks learned to sleep awake and listen to the fire of the universe." Aiden swallowed hard. "And where is it?" Calder stepped back, his expression grave. "That," he said, "is what your vision must reveal. And if the whispers chose you, it means time is running out." Adon's heart hammered. The quiet, contemplative life he had known was over. Something vast, tangent, dangerous was unfolding, and he was now at the center of it. The day passed in a blur of chores and quiet tension. Aiden moved through the abbey almost mechanically, his thoughts still tangled in the visions of the vigil stone. The scriptorium offered no distraction. The quill scratched against parchment, repeating words he had copied hundreds of times before. Yet each letter felt heavy with anticipation. Even Brother Elias noticed the change in him, casting curious glances as Aiden's fingers trembled slightly, still feeling the residual energy of the stone's whisper. At midday, Calder called him to the refectory. The large hall was silent except for the faint clatter of plates being arranged. The monks ate without conversation, a sacred custom meant to encourage contemplation over mere sustenance. Calder gestured to a bench beside him. "Sit," Calder instructed, and Aiden obeyed, noticing that the vigil stone's image lingered in his mind like an imprint of light. "You saw the map," Calder began, voice low. "The stone does not reveal its secrets to everyone, only those it deems capable." "I don't understand," Aiden said, feeling the weight of words he could barely comprehend. "Why me? Why now?" Calder's gaze softened, yet remained firm. "The vigil has centuries of memory, but it is alive. It watches, it waits, it selects, and it has chosen you because the time is critical. The whispers, the messages, left by the earliest custodians, cannot wait any longer. You must follow the path the stone revealed. Aidan swallowed, his stomach tightening. The notion of following a mysterious, centuries-old map deep into unknown lands, guided only by a glowing stone, felt like stepping into another world. And yet, a part of him, one he had never known, thrummed with a strange excitement. The same part that had always longed for adventure beyond the abbey walls. Calder leaned closer. You are not alone, but the first steps must be yours alone. The stone will guide you, but it will test your resolve. It has done so for monks who walked before you. Some returned enlightened, others did not return at all. Aidan's heart skipped a beat. Fear threatened to root him in place. He looked around the refectory. The soft glow of the afternoon sun through stained glass windows painted streaks of crimson and gold across the stone floor. Monks passed quietly, oblivious to the weight of the conversation unfolding on the bench. Where do I begin? He asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. Calder reached into the folds of his robe and produced a small leather satchel. Inside was a simple bundle, a length of rope, a flint for fire, a few preserved rations, and a carefully folded parchment containing markings that mirrored the lines of the glowing map he had seen in his vision. Calder's hands shook slightly as he passed it to him. This will guide you through the first stage, Calder said. Trust the stone. It will awaken more than your senses. It will awaken what lies dormant within you. Aidan nodded, but he did not feel reassured. The stone had already shown him images of distant lands, deserts under silver moons, monasteries carved into cliffs, and rituals older than any abbey he had ever known. Now he was expected to step into that vision and make it real. Evening came, and the abbey sank into quiet once more. The bells tolled for vespers, calling monks to prayer. Aidan followed the rhythm, seated himself in the choir stall, and allowed the stillness to settle over him. The upright posture that once had been uncomfortable now felt like preparation muscles, tensed yet ready, mind alert yet calm. He closed his eyes. The stone's whisper came again, not through sight this time, but through sensation, a soft vibration in his chest, like a heartbeat that was not entirely his own. It pulsed in rhythm with his own, slow and steady. He focused, following the pulse inward, letting his awareness expand beyond his body. Visions appeared sharper now than before. A narrow canyon where sunlight burned against red rock. A shadowed path leading to a monastery perched on the edge of a cliff. A figure in a hood pointing toward the horizon where a spiral of stars stretched across the night sky. The custodies, the ancient guardians of knowledge, moved in and out of his vision, faceless yet unmistakably present. Aidan understood, suddenly, that his journey would be both physical and spiritual. The monks' upright sleep, their stillness, their silence, it had been a training ground, conditioning the mind to listen to whispers others could not hear. The vigil stone had awakened him in ways ordinary sleep never could. A faint sound drew him back to reality. A soft knock at the chamber door. It was Brother Elias, standing silently in the shadows. He stepped inside and nodded once, wordlessly acknowledging the weight of what Aidan had experienced. Prepare yourself, Elias whispered, his tone calm but edged with concern. Tomorrow you begin. Aidan nodded, feeling the knot of anxiety in his chest. Tomorrow he would leave the only life he had ever known. Tomorrow he would step into the unknown, guided only by a stone, a vision and the memory of whispers that seemed to echo from centuries past. That night, he tried to sleep upright once more. The choir stalls were empty save for him. The shadows stretched across the walls like long fingers, and the stone that had guided him sat on a small pedestal at the center of the room, glowing faintly as if it anticipated his dreams. Aidan settled into stillness, legs aching slightly, back stiff, but mind alert. The stone pulsed, and a whisper, soft as a breath, filled the room. Begin. He inhaled deeply, exhaling slowly. The journey had begun even if his body remained seated. The first step had been taken in the deepest recesses of his mind. The darkness of the abbey felt alive that night, not threatening, not hostile, but aware, as if the centuries of vigil had been waiting for someone to carry the torch forward. And Aidan understood that he was now part of something greater than himself, an unbroken chain of monks, visions, and secrets, stretching back to a time when men first learned to sleep awake and hear what ordinary ears could not perceive. And so he rested, half sleeping, half awake, ready for what awaited beyond the abbey walls, ready to step into the world of the custodies. The first light of dawn broke across the abbey's outer walls, spilling pale gold over the moss-covered stones. Brother Aidan rose from the choir stall, his muscles stiff, but his mind strangely awake, alert, and pulsing with anticipation. The vigil stone's whisper lingered in the corners of his awareness, faint but insistent, like the echo of a song long forgotten. Today, he would leave the comfort and predictability of the monastery. Today, the first step of his journey into the unknown would be taken. He packed the leather satchel Calder had given him the previous evening, double-checking the rope, the flint, the rations, and the parchment marked with the map symbols he had glimpsed in his vision. Every item felt weighty, not only with physical mass, but with purpose. Every stitch of the leather, every edge of the parchment seemed alive with meaning. As he stepped out into the crisp morning air, the abbey's silence greeted him like a benediction. The sun had not fully risen, leaving the courtyard in delicate shadow. Aidan paused for a moment, looking back at the tall stone walls, the cloister arches, and the quiet windows where monks would soon be rising for their morning prayers. He realized, with a thrill he could hardly contain, that this was the last time he would see the abbey exactly as it had been. Brother Elias appeared quietly beside him, robes flowing, eyes calm yet knowing. "Remember," Elias said softly, "the path is not only outward, is inward as well. The vigil stone does not simply guide your steps, it guides your mind. Trust it, but question what you feel. The custodies are not mere shadows, they test the heart, the soul, and the courage of those who follow." Aidan nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand," he murmured. They walked together toward the northern gate, the ancient stones beneath their sandals, worn smooth by centuries of passage. Elias paused at the gate, placing a hand on the cold iron latch. "This is as far as I go," he said. "From here, the path is yours. The first step lies beyond the cliffs and the forest that lies below the abbey. The map you carry will guide you, but beware, the stone often reveals more than one sees. Its glow will attract attention. Keep your focus." Aidan took a deep breath and stepped through the gate, feeling a mixture of fear, excitement, and awe. The path immediately descended sharply, a narrow trail carved into the cliffs, lined with twisted roots and rough stone. He kept his eyes forward, careful not to stumble. But the vigil stone's pulse thrummed in his satchel, almost like a heartbeat synchronized with his own. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it faint scents of pine, earth, and distant rain. Aidan felt the pulse of the stone grow stronger as he descended, the vibrations almost guiding him, suggesting which stones to step on, which roots to grasp. The map in his satchel contained symbols corresponding to natural landmarks, the curve of a river, the shape of a boulder, the bend of a canyon wall. Hours passed, the sun rose higher, yet he felt little fatigue, his body responding with the same alertness he had cultivated in the vigil, the upright meditation. The hours of silence and stillness had strengthened more than his mind. They had conditioned his body to endure, to remain vigilant in motion as in stillness. At the edge of the forest, the path became narrow, almost hidden beneath a canopy of twisted branches. Shadows clung to the ground like living things. The vigil stone pulsed brighter, almost urging him forward. Aidan felt his heart race, yet it was a calm, steady excitement, not panic. He entered the forest cautiously, aware of every sound, the snap of a twig underfoot, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint cry of a distant bird. The stone vibrated in his satchel, and a soft, low hum filled the air around him, imperceptible to the forest itself, but unmistakable to his ears. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing in rhythm with the hum. The pulse guided him not just along the physical path, but deeper, as if showing the way forward in his thoughts, his decisions, his very intuition. By midday, he reached a clearing bathed in sunlight. At its center stood an ancient oak, wide and gnarled, its roots sprawling across the earth like veins. The stone's glow grew intense, and Aidan sensed the presence of something, an intelligence, a quiet awareness within the clearing. He approached cautiously. The air shimmered slightly around the oak, like heat haze in the desert, though the air was cool. He knelt by the roots, sensing the pulse from the vigil stone intensify, and then he saw it, a faint carving etched into the bark, symbols almost identical to those on the map, glowing faintly beneath the sunlight. Aidan traced the markings with a trembling finger. The symbols shifted subtly as he watched, rearranging themselves into a new pattern, revealing the direction he must take next. Deeper into the forest, toward a river that was only visible from a high ridge. A chill ran through him. The custodes' trial had begun. Every instinct told him to hesitate. Yet another part, the part that had felt the whispers, the pulse, the stone, urged him forward. He rose, slinging the satchel over his shoulder, and set off along the path indicated by the carvings. Hours passed. The forest thickened, the light dimmed under the dense canopy, and the sounds of nature, though pleasant, felt almost otherworldly. The stone pulsed rhythmically, almost like it was alive, directing him with subtle vibrations in his hands, in his feet, in the very center of his chest. As twilight approached, Aidan reached the ridge overlooking the river. The water glinted in the fading light like molten silver. Beyond the river, the outline of another ancient structure, possibly another monastery, rose against the darkening horizon. The vigil stone vibrated strongly, urging him onward. He descended toward the river, cautiously. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like a ritual. The custodes were testing him, the stone guiding him, and the forest itself seemed aware of his presence. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that the vigil's journey was only beginning, and that the path ahead would challenge him beyond anything he had imagined. Yet Aidan felt no fear, only determination, focus, and a deep, unshakable sense that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The whispers of the stone were now clearer, guiding not only his steps, but his mind, opening doors within him that had been closed for centuries. He crossed the river just as the sun disappeared, the last light painting the water in fiery reds and deep purples. The structure across the bank loomed, mysterious and beckoning. Aidan inhaled deeply, tightening the strap of his satchel, feeling the pulse of the vigil stone strong against his side. Tonight, he would reach the first checkpoint. Tonight, the custodes' tests would deepen. And as darkness enveloped the forest, he stepped forward, ready to meet whatever awaited beyond the river, trusting in the stone, in the whispers, and in the vigil itself. The night pressed down like a velvet cloak as Aidan moved cautiously through the darkened forest beyond the riverbank. The river itself glimmered silver in the moonlight, its surface smooth but carrying a faint, urgent undertone, the kind of sound that suggested movement beneath, or perhaps a warning. Every step felt both fragile and deliberate. The vigil stone pulsed steadily in his satchel, illuminating his path subtly, like a heartbeat in the shadows. Its guidance was more than physical. It whispered to his senses, sharpening his awareness, heightening his perception of everything around him. The forest seemed alive, more so than any ordinary woodland. Shadows stretched in impossible ways, branches curved like reaching fingers, and the soft rustle of unseen animals was constant, yet eerily silent. Aidan's ears strained, trying to decipher the patterns, the rhythms. But the vigil stone's hum overrode most other sounds, centering him, reminding him to move with patience and clarity. Hours passed. His legs grew sore, muscles trembling from exertion, yet the pulse in his chest matched the rhythm of the stone, steadying him. He came across fallen logs and jagged rocks that could have tripped a less attentive traveler. But the stone's subtle vibrations guided his feet to safe spots. The path ahead was unclear physically, but the energy around him felt like an invisible map, leading him through the labyrinthine forest with unseen hands. Suddenly, he sensed movement, a flicker in the shadows, too swift to be an ordinary creature. He froze. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the forest were holding its breath. The vigil stone pulsed sharply, almost like a warning, and he instinctively ducked behind a thick oak. The shadow passed. Aidan's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through him. But the stone's vibrations remained calm, steady, reassuring him that he had nothing to fear if he remained mindful and patient. He continued, stepping more carefully now, aware that the forest had layers beyond sight. The vigil was teaching him not just to move, but to observe, to listen, to feel. Every rustle, every shimmer of moonlight through leaves, every whisper of wind carried meaning. His mind opened in ways it had never done before. He began to notice patterns in the dark, subtle alignments of trees and stones that led him naturally toward his destination. Hours blurred into one another, the night deepening. Eventually, he reached a small clearing illuminated by faint phosphorescent moss clinging to stones and tree trunks. At the center of the clearing stood a solitary obelisk, weathered and ancient, covered in faded symbols that glowed faintly when the stone pulsed in his satchel. Aidan approached it with reverence. This was the first checkpoint, the mark of the custodes' presence in this forest. He knelt before the obelisk, placing the vigil stone atop a carved platform at its base. The glow of the stone intensified, casting elongated shadows across the mossy clearing. Symbols carved into the obelisk began to shimmer, shifting subtly, revealing intricate patterns he recognized from his vision. He realized the custodes were not only guiding him, but communicating directly through the stone. showing him the deeper layers of knowledge he needed to access. Aidan felt a sudden warmth spread through his chest, a connection that went beyond sight or sound. The air around him vibrated with energy, the forest alive in a way that was palpable. He understood intuitively that the path forward was both literal and symbolic, crossing the river, navigating the forest, and uncovering the hidden wisdom of the ancient monastic line that had created the vigil stone centuries before. Then, movement stirred behind him, a subtle shift of leaves, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. He spun, reaching instinctively for the satchel. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and cloaked, face hidden beneath a hood. The presence was neither threatening nor friendly, simply their sentinel of the custodies, perhaps testing his courage and focus. The figure's voice was soft, almost a breath, yet it resonated clearly in Iadon's mind. You have reached the first threshold. Few have come this far, and fewer still have understood the whispers as you have. Aidan swallowed hard. Who are you? He whispered. An observer, the figure replied. A guide when needed, though your path remains yours alone. The vigil tests not the body, but the spirit. You have passed the first stage by trusting in the stone and in yourself. Remember, fear clouds perception. Patience opens it. The figure stepped back, fading into the shadows, leaving Aidan alone with the obelisk and the glowing stone. He exhaled, heart pounding, yet feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The forest felt different, now less menacing, more like a living map, responsive to his presence, attuned to his focus. He remained kneeling for several minutes, letting the pulse of the stone settle into him, synchronizing with his own heartbeat. The obelisk's symbols slowly dimmed, but the impressions lingered in his mind. This knowledge, this guidance, was permanent, etched into his consciousness in a way words never could convey. Finally, he rose. The path ahead was still uncertain, yet he felt prepared in ways he could not have predicted before beginning the vigil. He adjusted the satchel, slung over his shoulder, and looked toward the faint outline of distant cliffs hinted at through the gaps in the forest canopy. The next stage awaited him there, and the stone's pulse quickened slightly, signaling forward movement. As Aidan moved onward, the forest began to thin, revealing rocky terrain ahead. Cliffs and ravines forming natural obstacles that would challenge both his body and his mind. Each step required careful judgment, awareness, and trust in the stone. The custodes test was not just survival, it was understanding, patience, and presence. Hours passed under the shifting moonlight. Aidan navigated narrow ledges, clambered over jagged boulders, and paused frequently to observe the subtle signs the vigil stone revealed. Shadows and light intertwined, forming patterns only perceptible to those truly attuned. He felt the forest, the stone, and himself in a complex symphony of awareness, as if he were both observer and participant in a living, breathing entity. At last, as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Aidan reached a plateau overlooking a vast valley below. The river he had crossed earlier snaked through the terrain like a silver ribbon, and across its banks, nestled between cliffs, lay the ruins of an ancient monastery, its outline faint but unmistakable. The vigil stone pulsed strongly, almost insistently. He understood the next stage of his journey awaited him there. With a deep breath, Aidan stepped forward, ready to descend into the valley, into the ruins, into the next chapter of the custodes test. The whispers of the stone guided him, steady and sure, as he embraced the uncertainty ahead, knowing that each step brought him closer to the mysteries he had glimpsed only in visions. The journey was far from over, yet the rhythm of his heartbeat, synchronized with the pulse of the vigil stone, filled him with unwavering resolve. He was no longer merely a monk following ancient rituals. He had become part of something greater, an unbroken chain stretching across centuries, guiding him toward knowledge, courage, and the ultimate truth hidden within the vigil. The valley stretched before Aidan like a living tapestry of history and silence. Mist clung to the edges of the river and the ancient ruins, softening their jagged lines and lending them an ethereal glow in the early morning light. From his vantage point atop the plateau, he could see the monastery ruins sprawled along the riverbank. Stone walls crumbled, but still hinting at the grandeur that must have once existed. The vigil stone pulsed in his satchel, a steady heartbeat guiding him, urging caution and focus. Each step now demanded mindfulness, for the terrain was treacherous, filled with loose rocks, narrow paths, and sudden drops that could spell disaster for the unprepared. Aidan descended carefully, tracing the contours of the landscape as though reading a map written in stone and shadow. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of earth and moss, and the distant sound of rushing water from the river below. As he moved closer to the ruins, he noticed carvings etched into stones along the river's edge, symbols familiar from the vigil stone's glow and his visions. Each marking seemed to resonate with the stone, its pulse synchronizing with his own heartbeat, creating a rhythm that guided his steps and steadying his mind. The ruins were silent, but alive with history. Crumbling archways and shattered pillars hinted at centuries of ritual and knowledge. And Aidan felt the weight of countless monks who had walked these grounds before him. The stone's glow intensified as he approached the main hall of the monastery, illuminating the faint inscriptions on the walls. He ran his fingers along the weathered carvings, reading the symbols not just with his eyes but with a deep, intuitive understanding. The custodes' presence was palpable here, as though the air itself remembered the devotion and discipline of generations past. Aidan paused at the entrance of a central chamber, noting a circular stone platform at its center. The surface was etched with complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift subtly in the morning light. He placed the vigil stone on the platform, and immediately the carvings began to glow faintly, forming lines and shapes that aligned perfectly with the markings on his parchment. The stone's pulse strengthened, a rhythmic vibration that coursed through his hands and into his chest. He felt a surge of clarity, as if the room itself were speaking to him, conveying knowledge beyond words. Suddenly, the sound of wind through the ruins shifted, carrying a whisper that seemed to come from every direction at once. Aidan closed his eyes, letting the vibrations of the stone merge with the whisper. Patterns emerged in his mind, paths to follow, obstacles to anticipate, lessons encoded in the very architecture of the monastery. The custodes were teaching him through the stone, the ruins, and the whispers that had guided countless monks before him. Understanding dawned. The journey was not merely about physical navigation. It was a test of perception, discipline, and insight. Hours passed as Aidan explored the monastery, each discovery revealing new layers of the custodes' intent. Hidden alcoves contained ancient manuscripts, their ink faded but still legible, chronicling the lives of monks who had dedicated themselves to the vigil. One manuscript recounted a monk who had attained profound understanding by sleeping upright in silence for decades, mastering the ability to perceive the subtle energies of the stone. Another described rituals designed to synchronize the mind and body, enhancing the clarity needed to interpret the custody's guidance. The deeper Aidan delved, the more he realized that his journey was as much about mastering himself as following the path laid out by the vigil stone. He practiced standing perfectly still, his body taut yet relaxed, sensing the flow of energy through the chamber. The whispers became clearer, forming coherent phrases in his mind, urging patience, focus, and humility. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat became a part of the lesson, teaching him to move with intention and awareness. As twilight approached, the ruins took on a more mysterious quality. Shadows lengthened, weaving intricate patterns across the stone floors, and the pulse of the vigil stone intensified. Aidan felt a subtle shift in the energy around him, a presence, approaching, unseen, yet undeniably aware. He turned toward the sound, feeling neither fear nor anticipation, only quiet vigilance. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in dark robes, face hidden beneath a hood, but emanating an aura of authority and quiet power. Aidan recognized this presence as another manifestation of the custody's guidance, a sentinel testing his readiness. The figure gestured toward the circular platform where the vigil stone rested, and a silent understanding passed between them. "You have come far." The figure's voice resonated directly in Iadon's mind, a calm and deliberate tone. "Few have walked this far with clarity and patience. The vigil stone has chosen you because it senses your capacity for understanding, but the path ahead grows more challenging. You must trust not only in the stone, but in the wisdom you have cultivated through stillness and silence. The final trials require both courage and discernment." Aidan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him. The pulse of the stone seemed to quicken slightly, almost in approval, and he sensed that this encounter marked a pivotal moment in his journey. The ruins, the forest, the river, they had all been tests, training him for what lay beyond. As night fully enveloped the valley, Aidan settled near the platform, allowing the vigil stone to pulse against his chest. The whispers grew softer, now almost lullabies, guiding him into a state of deep reflection. He understood that sleep in this sacred context was not escape, but preparation. The upright, meditative posture he had practiced at the abbey would serve him here as well, attuning his mind to the subtle cues of the custodes and the stone. Through the hours of darkness, he remained vigilant, yet relaxed, every fiber of his being aligned with the rhythm of the stone. By the time the first light of dawn touched the ruins, Aidan felt renewed, his mind sharpened, his senses heightened, and his spirit attuned to the path the vigil stone had illuminated. He was ready to move forward, to leave the ruins and descend into the valley below, following the guidance of the custodes toward the next stage of his journey. The sun rose, casting golden light across the stones, and Aidan took a deep breath, lifting the vigil stone from the platform and tucking it safely into his satchel. The forest awaited beyond the valley, more complex and demanding than before, yet he felt a newfound confidence. Each step taken, each challenge faced, had strengthened him, teaching lessons far beyond physical endurance, patience, clarity, intuition, and the courage to confront the unknown. With careful, deliberate steps, Aidan began his descent from the ruins, leaving behind the echoing chambers of the ancient monastery. The vigil stone pulsed in his satchel, a steadfast companion guiding him onward toward new challenges, deeper knowledge, and the profound mysteries yet to be revealed by the custodes. The valley below stretched like a canvas of shadow and light as Aidan stepped carefully over rocks and loose soil, the vigil stone pulsing rhythmically in his satchel. The ruins he had left behind seemed almost to sigh, a quiet acknowledgment of his progress, as if the stones themselves were aware of his passage. He paused briefly to scan the landscape, noting the path of the river that wound through the valley and the thick forest lining its edges. The pulse of the stone grew slightly stronger, almost urging him onward. As he descended, the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Steep ridges and narrow ledges forced him to focus on each movement, balancing body and mind with precision. The vigil stone's guidance was subtle yet unwavering, a gentle reminder to trust in his instincts and the lessons he had absorbed in the monastery. Every step demanded patience, every breath measured, yet Aidan felt a deep sense of flow, as though the forest, the stone, and his own spirit had become a single entity. The forest ahead was dense, a labyrinth of ancient trees whose trunks were thick with moss and whose branches intertwined to form a natural canopy that filtered the light into faint green hues. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and the sounds of the forest, the whisper of leaves, the distant cry of a bird took on an almost musical quality, blending with the pulse of the stone in his satchel. Aidan moved with care, listening to the subtle guidance of both stone and nature. Hours passed in this rhythm. He climbed over fallen trees, skirted around small ravines, and traced the winding path of a dry stream. The stone's vibrations became more insistent as he neared a rocky outcropping, jagged and imposing against the backdrop of the valley. He recognized this as the next checkpoint from the carvings and symbols in the monastery, a test of both his courage and his perception. Approaching the outcropping, he noticed faint etchings in the stone symbols that glimmered faintly in the dim light, recognizable from the vigil stone's glow. He knelt and traced the patterns with his fingers, feeling the pulse of the stone intensify under his touch. These markings were not merely directional, they conveyed layered messages, teaching him to observe beyond the surface, to understand the forest's subtleties, and to anticipate challenges that lay ahead. The moment was interrupted by a sudden rustle. A movement in the underbrush caught his attention. Aidan froze, feeling the familiar hum of the vigil stone guide his awareness. From the shadows emerged a fox, its eyes bright and intelligent, watching him carefully before it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The brief encounter left a lingering sense of connection to the wilderness, a reminder that every element of the environment was alive, a participant in the custodes test. Night approached, and Aidan reached the base of the rocky outcropping. The stone's glow grew faint but steady, a soft hum guiding his hands as he searched for a route upward. He found a narrow path winding between boulders and began his careful ascent. Each foothold demanded precise attention, each branch and root offering support or potential danger. The pulse of the vigil stone synced with his heartbeat, providing clarity and steady reassurance. Reaching the summit as twilight settled, he paused to survey the valley below. The river gleamed in the fading light, winding through trees that now seemed more alive than ever. Across the water, the faint outline of another structure appeared, a long-abandoned watchtower, perched on a hill that overlooked the forest. The stone pulsed in his satchel, signaling the next stage of his journey. Aidan understood that the tower held another lesson, another challenge, a continuation of the custodes' silent guidance. Descending the opposite side of the outcropping toward the river, He crossed shallow rapids and navigated slippery stones, the vigil stone's pulse steadying him at each precarious step. He marveled at how the custodes' tests combined physical challenges with mental and spiritual lessons. The stone not only guided him physically, but also honed his perception, sharpening his intuition and strengthening his patience. As darkness enveloped the valley, he reached the base of the hill on which the watchtower stood. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and a faint wind whispered through the trees, carrying scents of pine and wet earth. Aidan felt the pulse of the vigil stone quicken slightly, a reminder that the custodes' trials were intensifying. Every instinct, every sense heightened, preparing him for the tests that awaited within the tower's walls. Climbing the hill, he noted the intricate carvings along the tower's base symbols etched centuries ago, glowing faintly under the stone's influence. He knelt again, tracing the designs, feeling the vibrations course through his hands, up his arms, and into his chest. The custodes' message was clear. Observation, patience, and courage were as critical as physical strength. The tower itself was a living lesson, a repository of wisdom, its walls silent but communicative to those attuned to the vigil. The entrance loomed before him, a narrow archway, partially blocked by fallen stones. Aidan cleared the debris carefully, mindful not to disturb the delicate balance of the ancient masonry. Entering, he found a spiral staircase carved directly into the stone, winding upward into darkness. He ascended slowly, each step echoing through the hollow tower, every vibration resonating with the pulse of the stone in his satchel. At the top, a chamber awaited him, circular and silent, with openings to the surrounding forest. The moonlight filtered through the narrow slits in the stone, casting silver patterns across the floor. At the center, a raised platform with a carved basin held faint traces of water. The vigil stone pulsed strongly, almost insistently, and Aidan realized this was a test of stillness and reflection, a challenge to quiet the mind and perceive the subtleties of energy and intuition. Kneeling before the basin, he placed the stone atop its carved surface. The glow intensified, illuminating symbols etched into the chamber walls, revealing a constellation of lessons and guidance. He closed his eyes, allowing the vibrations of the stone to merge with his own heartbeat, his breath, and the quiet rhythm of the chamber. For hours, he remained in meditation, absorbing the subtle teachings, aligning body, mind, and spirit with the custodes' design. By the first light of dawn, Aidan rose, feeling a profound sense of clarity and purpose. He understood that the journey was far from complete, yet he had internalized lessons that transcended physical challenges. The tower had imparted wisdom about observation, patience, courage, and alignment with forces unseen yet deeply felt. With careful steps, he descended the spiral staircase, ready to continue along the path the vigil stone illuminated, toward new discoveries, greater trials, and the unfolding mysteries of the custodes' guidance. Aidan stepped out of the watchtower into the cool morning air, the valley stretching endlessly before him. The mist hovered low along the riverbanks, wrapping the landscape in a soft, ethereal glow. The vigil stone pulsed steadily in his satchel, its rhythmic beat a quiet encouragement. Every instinct, every fiber of his being was alert. He had learned that in the custodes' trials, even a moment of distraction could unravel progress. Today, the path ahead seemed less like a journey through terrain and more like a journey through hidden layers of perception and understanding. The forest beyond the river beckoned, denser now, its trees twisting skyward in forms that seemed deliberately chaotic, yet perfectly ordered to the trained eye. Aidan paused, feeling the pulse of the stone intensify slightly. It was urging him onward, guiding him toward an unseen path that only revealed itself to those patient and attentive enough to perceive it. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh scent of pine and damp earth fill his lungs, and began to navigate the winding trails with careful precision. The river, now to his right, flowed with a quiet strength. Small rapids and jagged rocks broke its surface, their patterns shifting constantly with the water's movement. The vigil stone seemed to resonate with the flow, teaching him not merely to walk alongside it, but to understand the rhythms and undercurrents, both literal and metaphorical. Each footstep became deliberate, measured, as he aligned himself with the pulse of nature, the flow of the river, and the subtle hum of the stone guiding his mind. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. Shadows shifted as the sun climbed, casting long fingers of light that danced across the forest floor. Aidan's eyes, once solely focused on navigation, began to perceive subtler details. The slight bend of a branch, indicating a hidden trail, the moss's hue, revealing moisture levels and safe footing. Even the faint vibrations of the stone, signaling unseen energy currents in the environment. The custodies' lessons extended far beyond physical challenges. They trained perception, intuition, and an awareness that bridged the tangible and the unseen. As the afternoon approached, Aidan noticed a series of stone markers partially hidden among the trees, worn by time yet unmistakable in their placement. He knelt beside the first, tracing its carvings, familiar yet enigmatic, glowing faintly under the influence of the vigil stone. It spoke of perseverance, patience, and the necessity of quiet courage. He moved to the second, and then the third, each symbol reinforcing the rhythm he had learned to maintain, each pulse synchronizing with his breath, heartbeat, and awareness. Suddenly, the forest shifted in sensation. The air grew cooler, the shadows deeper, and the distant hum of the stone seemed to carry a subtle warning. Aidan paused, scanning the surroundings. Movement flickered at the periphery of his vision, too quick for the eye to catch, but undeniable to the instinct honed by hours of vigil training. He crouched, drawing from the calm focus cultivated in the tower, and observed the patterns. The figure revealed itself a large wolf, its coat silver under the fading light, eyes bright with intelligence and caution. The wolf stepped closer, and Aidan froze, trusting in the stone's guidance. The pulse was steady, encouraging patience and respect. The creature circled, sniffed the air, and for a tense moment, the world seemed suspended. Then, with a final glance, it disappeared silently into the shadows. Aidan exhaled, heart steady, understanding the encounter as both a test and a lesson. The vigil demanded harmony with the environment, the courage to remain composed in uncertainty, and the humility to acknowledge forces beyond comprehension. The forest gradually thinned, revealing rolling hills dotted with ancient oaks and wildflowers. Aidan's path now took on a more deliberate incline, winding toward a distant plateau. The vigil stone pulsed more strongly here, guiding him toward the summit. Each step upward tested his stamina and focus, the incline steep but navigable, thanks to the careful observations and intuitive awareness he had developed throughout his journey. By mid-afternoon, he reached the plateau and paused to take in the vast panorama. From this height, he could see the forest stretching to the horizon, the river snaking through the valley below, and in the distance, a faint glimmer of structures, hidden within the tree's other checkpoint, another lesson waiting to be uncovered. The vigil stone's pulse quickened, signaling urgency tempered by patience. Aidan adjusted the satchel, feeling the weight not as a burden, but as a companion, a guide imbued with the wisdom of generations. Descending the plateau toward the hidden structures, Aidan moved with precision and awareness. Fallen branches, uneven rocks, and sudden drops demanded constant attention. Yet he felt a rhythm emerging in his steps, synchronized with the stone's pulse and the natural cadence of the terrain. The custode's guidance was unmistakable. Mastery over external challenges required mastery over internal discipline. His thoughts were calm, clear, and focused, every decision deliberate. At last, he arrived at a small clearing where remnants of stone walls suggested a long-forgotten observatory or study hall. Vines and moss covered most surfaces, but the vigil stone pulsed in resonance with the carved symbols still visible on the stones. Kneeling, Aidan traced the patterns, feeling a surge of energy as the stone's glow intensified. The symbols spoke of alignment, not just of the physical body, but of mind and spirit, with the currents of knowledge and wisdom preserved by the custodes over centuries. Hours passed as he explored the ruins, each discovery reinforcing lessons in perception, patience, and courage. Small alcoves contained fragments of manuscripts, inscriptions of celestial charts, and symbols aligning with the moon and stars. The vigil stone resonated with each, deepening his understanding of the custode's purpose to train not merely the body, but perception, intuition, and harmony with forces both seen and unseen. By evening, Aidan settled within the ruins, allowing the stone to pulse against his chest. The air was cool, carrying whispers of the forest and river below. He meditated, focusing on the rhythm of the stone and the lessons absorbed throughout the day. With each breath, he felt alignment with the path, clarity in thought, and steadiness in spirit. The journey had become more than survival. It was now an unfolding of perception, discipline, and courage that would define him for the challenges ahead. Night fell, and the vigil stone pulsed gently in the darkness. Aidan understood that tomorrow would bring new tests, deeper mysteries, and further revelations. Yet he felt prepared, his senses sharpened, his spirit attuned, and his mind clear. The path forward, while uncertain, was illuminated by the rhythm of the stone and the lessons he had internalized. With a calm resolve, he closed his eyes and allowed the forest, the ruins, and the custode's presence to guide him into restful awareness. Readying for the next stage of the journey, dawn broke softly over the forest clearing, filtering through the thick canopy in golden streaks. Aidan rose slowly, feeling the pulse of the vigil stone steady against his chest. The night had been long and deep, yet restorative. His mind felt sharper, senses attuned to even the smallest shifts in the forest around him. Every rustle of leaves, every chirp of birds, every subtle change in the wind carried meaning now, interpreted through the rhythm of the stone and the lessons embedded in his consciousness. Today's journey would demand the same precision, patience, and courage he had cultivated in the tower and along the valley paths. The path ahead wound through denser undergrowth, the remnants of the ancient forest reclaiming old trails. Aidan moved deliberately, using a long, sturdy staff to probe unseen roots and rocks, each step measured and cautious. The vigil stone pulsed gently, synchronizing with his heartbeat and the subtle vibrations of the terrain. He had come to realize that the custodes' tests were not simply about physical endurance, but about a heightened awareness of his environment and a mastery of observation, intuition, and internal discipline. Hours passed as he navigated the maze-like forest. Occasional glimpses of sunlight illuminated the moss-covered floor, revealing faint, ancient carvings on stones and trees, markers left by monks and custodes before him. Kneeling beside each, he traced the patterns carefully, feeling the pulse of the stone respond to the symbols. Each marking conveyed layered lessons: patience in waiting, clarity in observation, and courage in confronting uncertainty. The custodes' message was subtle, yet unmistakable. Every detail, no matter how small, held significance for those willing to perceive. By mid-morning, Aidan reached a river wider and swifter than the one he had followed through the valley. Its waters churned over jagged rocks, and a mist rose along its surface. The vigil stone pulsed urgently, signaling that the river would not simply be crossed. It would test his perception and resolve. Aidan surveyed the terrain, noting the natural stepping stones, the shallow banks, and the hidden currents beneath deceptively calm surfaces. He understood that rushing forward would invite danger. Patience, calculation, and intuition were his allies. He moved slowly, placing each foot carefully on the slick stones, testing their stability with his staff before committing weight. The pulse of the vigil stone guided his rhythm, syncing his movements to the natural flow of the river. One misstep could have been fatal, yet the stone's guidance and his refined focus allowed him to traverse the river safely. On the opposite bank, he paused to draw in deep, steadying breaths, feeling a surge of quiet triumph, yet mindful that the custodes' trials were far from over. The landscape beyond the river opened into rolling hills, dotted with rocky outcroppings. A faint path wound through the terrain, but it was overgrown and partially obscured. Aidan noticed subtle signs: the way the grass bent, faint impressions in the soil, small carvings on exposed stones. Each clue reinforced the lesson that perception was paramount. The custodes rewarded those who observed, who remained patient, and who aligned their movements and decisions with the subtle energies of the environment. As the afternoon approached, Aidan came across the remains of a small stone chapel, partially collapsed yet still intact enough to offer shelter. He entered cautiously, observing the carvings and inscriptions that adorned the walls. Faded frescoes depicted monks in silent contemplation, their bodies upright and attentive, an echo of the practices he had studied in manuscripts and experienced in the tower. The vigil stone pulsed strongly here, as if confirming the importance of this space, its resonance reinforcing the lessons of stillness, observation, and attunement to unseen forces. Inside the chapel, Aidan found an alcove containing fragments of scrolls. Carefully, he examined them, the faint inscriptions revealing teachings on endurance, discipline, and the alignment of mind, body, and spirit. Some passages described monks who had achieved remarkable clarity by sitting upright in silence, their minds and senses attuned to the subtle energies around them. Aidan realized that the custodes' guidance was cumulative: the lessons of the ruins, the tower, the forests, and now this chapel built upon each other, shaping him into someone capable of perceiving beyond the ordinary. Nightfall approached, and Aidan set up a small camp outside the chapel, the vigil stone pulsing steadily in his satchel. He sat upright, adopting the posture he had practiced throughout his journey, letting the rhythms of the stone and the forest guide his meditation. the stars began to emerge, each one a silent witness to his passage, reflecting the constellations recorded in the manuscripts and carvings he had studied. The custodes' lessons were not just about navigation or survival. They were about understanding the interconnectedness of all things, perceiving patterns in chaos, and cultivating a mind capable of clarity, resilience, and insight. As he closed his eyes, he felt the pulse of the stone harmonize with his own heartbeat. The whisper of the wind through the trees seemed almost like speech, carrying guidance and affirmation. Hours passed in quiet contemplation, and Aidan felt himself growing stronger, more attuned, more capable of sensing the subtle shifts that would guide him toward the next challenge. He understood that the journey was testing more than his body, it was training his perception, patience, and courage in a holistic way, preparing him for the deeper mysteries the custodes had set before him. Before sleep fully took him, Aidan reflected on the lessons of the day, the importance of observation over haste, the necessity of patience, and the courage to trust in guidance that was not always immediately apparent. The vigil stone had not simply led him through physical challenges. It had shown him how to move with awareness, think with clarity, and act with intention. Tomorrow would present new trials, but he felt ready, strengthened by the cumulative wisdom he had absorbed and the discipline he had cultivated through experience and reflection. The morning sun filtered through the chapel's broken windows, casting shifting patterns on the moss-covered floor. Aidan rose slowly, feeling the vigil stone pulse gently in his satchel. He had slept lightly but restfully, maintaining the upright posture he had practiced since the tower, allowing the stone's subtle vibrations to align his senses even in slumber. Today, the path ahead promised both physical and spiritual challenges, deeper than anything he had faced yet. The custodes' guidance had prepared him, sharpening intuition, focus, and resilience, qualities that would now be tested in ways beyond simple navigation. The overgrown path led him out of the chapel and into a narrow canyon where sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above. The air was cooler here, damp with the mist rising from an underground spring that fed the river below. Each step demanded deliberate care, as slippery rocks and twisted roots made footing uncertain. The vigil stone pulsed steadily, guiding Iadon's attention to subtle indicators in the terrain, patterns of moss, small depressions in stone, faint carvings hidden in shadow, providing clues to the safest and most enlightened path forward. Hours passed as he maneuvered through the canyon, the stone's pulse synchronizing with the rhythm of his breath. He became aware of subtle vibrations in the ground, hints of hidden streams beneath the soil, and the quiet energy of the canyon walls that seemed almost alive. The custodes had designed this test to refine more than balance and strength. They trained perception, awareness, and patience, teaching that understanding often came to those who observed without haste and acted with deliberate precision. At midday, the canyon widened, revealing a plateau of jagged stones, sun-bleached and cracked with age. In the center, an ancient obelisk rose, covered in faded inscriptions and geometric carvings. Aidan approached cautiously, feeling the vigil stone vibrate more intensely. The markings were familiar, echoing the lessons learned in the ruins, the tower, and the chapel. Kneeling, he traced the etchings, letting the pulse of the stone guide his fingers. The inscriptions spoke of courage, perception, and endurance, encoding a map of both the physical terrain and the spiritual path he must follow. As he studied the obelisk, the wind shifted, carrying faint whispers that seemed to emerge from the stone itself. Aidan closed his eyes, focusing entirely on the rhythm of the vigil stone and the subtle vibrations of the obelisk. Shapes, patterns, and sequences formed in his mind, providing insight into the next leg of his journey. The custodes' teaching was profound. The journey demanded harmony between mind, body, and environment, a unity of awareness that transcended ordinary perception. Descending from the plateau, Aidan entered a dense forest where shadows stretched long, and the light dimmed to an emerald hue. Fallen trees and tangled roots created natural obstacles, yet he moved with a fluidity and caution cultivated over weeks of trials. Each step, each careful placement of his hands and feet was guided not just by sight, but by intuition sharpened through meditation and interaction with the vigil stone. Subtle sounds, the whisper of the wind, and the scent of earth all informed his movements. Mid-afternoon brought a small glade, bathed in dappled sunlight, where the remains of a stone circle hinted at long-forgotten rituals. At the center, a shallow basin carved into the rock caught the filtered light, creating reflections that danced across the surrounding stones. Aidan knelt, placing the vigil stone within the basin. Its pulse intensified, and the carvings on the surrounding stones began to glow faintly, forming patterns that seemed to float in the air. He realized this was another lesson in perception, patience, and alignment, a chance to internalize the subtle energies of the custodes' design. Hours passed in quiet meditation, Aidan observing the light, the shadows, and the pulse of the stone. The forest seemed to breathe with him, each element participating in the teaching. He felt a profound connection to the custodes, to the monks who had walked these paths before him, and to the natural world itself. Every lesson was cumulative, building upon the previous trials: stillness, perception, courage, patience, and now a deeper understanding of harmony with unseen forces. As evening approached, Aidan packed the vigil stone carefully, feeling its steady pulse as a reminder of the wisdom he had absorbed. The path forward led to a steep hillside, dotted with boulders and ancient trees, requiring both strength and mental focus. Every careful step he took reinforced lessons in endurance, observation, and trust in himself, the stone, and the custodes' guidance. By nightfall, he reached a small cliff overlooking the river valley, the moonlight glinting off the water far below. He set the stone down and sat upright, adopting the posture he had practiced for weeks. The pulse of the stone harmonized with his heartbeat and breath, guiding him into a meditative state. He reflected on the day, the canyon's challenges, the obelisk, the forest, and the stone circle, teaching him patience, awareness, and courage. Sleep, though light, was intentional and restorative. The upright posture allowed his senses to remain alert, while the pulse of the vigil stone continued to teach in subtle rhythms. By morning, Aidan would be ready to navigate the next stage, carrying with him the accumulated lessons, perception, and clarity that each day and trial had imparted. Dawn broke over the river valley with a muted glow, the mist lifting slowly to reveal the undulating forest and distant hills. Aidan stood at the cliff's edge, the vigil stone pulsing gently against his chest, guiding his focus. The previous trials had refined his senses and patience, yet he knew the next stage demanded a deeper connection to the custodes' lessons. Each pulse of the stone reminded him that observation, courage, and intuition were inseparable. forming a triad essential for navigating both the terrain and the subtler challenges that awaited. He descended the cliff carefully, finding a narrow path winding through a dense thicket. The forest was alive with subtle movement, leaves quivering in the wind, small animals scurrying across the underbrush, and distant bird calls echoing through the trees. Aidan moved with deliberate intent, the stone's pulse enhancing his perception. Every step was a conversation with the environment, each sound and visual cue feeding into the rhythm of awareness the custodies demanded. Patience became action, observation became navigation, and intuition became a trusted guide. Mid-morning found him at the banks of a wide, reflective lake, its surface smooth and unbroken, except for the gentle ripple of a breeze. The vigil stone pulsed with increasing intensity, signaling that this was a site of significance. He approached cautiously, noting faint carvings along the shoreline, symbols partially obscured by moss and sediment. Kneeling, he traced the markings, feeling the stone's resonance intensify. The carvings spoke of balance, clarity, and inner alignment qualities the custodies emphasized as essential for both physical and spiritual survival. Aidan followed the shoreline until he came upon a series of partially submerged stepping stones, slick with algae and moss. Each stone appeared fragile and uneven, the slightest misstep risking immersion in the cold water. The stone pulsed steadily, synchronizing with his breath, his heartbeat, and the rhythm of his cautious steps. He tested each placement, finding the hidden stability beneath apparent instability, moving deliberately with awareness sharpened by weeks of vigil training. The act of crossing the lake became more than physical navigation. It was a lesson in trust, precision, and the cultivation of calm focus under uncertainty. Once across, he entered a grove of towering oaks whose roots twisted across the ground like a living lattice. Shadows deepened here, yet the stone pulsed faintly, illuminating subtle paths between the roots and guiding his movement. Aidan observed the forest with heightened perception, the bend of a branch, the placement of moss, and even the sound of wind through leaves, signaling safe passages or hidden obstacles. The custodi's teaching was clear. Success required more than strength or speed. It required total awareness and a patient, respectful attunement to the environment. Afternoon brought him to a small plateau overlooking the lake he had crossed. There, partially hidden beneath overgrowth, lay a ruin of stone walls, a long-abandoned hermitage or sanctuary. Aidan approached reverently, feeling the stone's pulse grow stronger. Carvings and inscriptions adorned the remnants, echoing lessons of endurance, reflection, and alignment of mind and spirit. Kneeling, he traced each symbol, letting the stone's glow illuminate subtle details. The custodies had constructed these lessons to be cumulative, each site reinforcing skills of perception, patience, and inner focus developed earlier in his journey. Within the ruin, he found an alcove containing a shallow basin, its surface reflecting the remaining light filtering through the collapsed roof. He placed the vigil stone in the basin, feeling its resonance merge with the carvings on the walls. Shapes, sequences, and subtle patterns emerged in the glow, revealing insights into the natural cycles, the interconnections of the forest, and the deeper rhythms that governed both environment and self. Hours passed as he meditated, letting the stone's pulse and the ambient energies guide his focus. Through stillness, he gained clarity. The custodi's lessons were about understanding hidden currents, both external and internal, and acting with precision, patience, and courage. Evening approached, and Aidan prepared a small camp within the ruin. He adopted his upright posture, letting the stone pulse gently against his chest. The forest outside grew quiet, the sounds of wildlife shifting to nocturnal rhythms. He focused on the stone, his breath, and the accumulated lessons, aligning his senses and spirit for the challenges that awaited tomorrow. The custodes' guidance had transformed the journey from mere survival into a practice of profound perception, patience, and courage. Each moment was both trial and teaching, each step a reflection of lessons internalized through hours of observation, meditation, and careful movement. Night deepened, and the vigil stone's pulse remained a steady companion, guiding him into a meditative state. Thoughts of previous trials, the tower, the chapel, the obelisk, and the lake crossing merged into a single continuum of understanding. Aidan recognized that his journey was no longer merely external. It was a shaping of perception, courage, and discipline within himself. By morning, he would face new challenges, but he felt prepared, fortified by the cumulative wisdom of the custodes and the rhythm of the vigil stone. The first light of dawn filtered through the tall oaks, casting dappled shadows across the stone ruins. Aidan rose slowly, feeling the steady pulse of the vigil stone against his chest. Last night's meditative focus had left him alert and attuned, ready to navigate the next stage of the custodes' trials. Today's path would test his endurance, intuition, and ability to perceive patterns hidden within apparent chaos. The lessons he had internalized over weeks of careful observation and reflection would be essential as he moved forward. The forest beyond the ruins was dense, a labyrinth of twisted roots, thick undergrowth, and towering trunks. Each step demanded awareness. A fallen branch could be a tripping hazard, a slick patch of moss, a hidden danger. The vigil stone pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, guiding him to move deliberately, to sense rather than merely see. The custodes had trained him to perceive the subtle signs in the environment, the sway of leaves, the alignment of rocks, the faint sound of water moving underground. Each signal carried meaning, a reminder that patience and attention were as vital as physical skill. By mid-morning, Aidan reached a rocky ravine, its walls rising steeply on either side. A narrow ledge ran along the cliff face, offering the only passage across. The stone pulsed urgently, signaling that this section required careful attention. He tested each foothold, feeling for stability, and aligned his movements with the subtle vibrations emanating from the vigil stone. The rhythm of his steps became a meditation, a merging of body, mind, and environment. Every misstep could prove costly, yet the training of the custodes had prepared him to move with both precision and calm awareness. The ledge opened into a small clearing where the remains of an ancient watchtower stood. Crumbled stones and moss-covered steps suggested a long-abandoned sentinel post. Aidan explored carefully, tracing carvings etched into the stones. Symbols of protection, endurance, and vigilance glowed faintly under the influence of the stone, revealing the custodes' layered instructions: perception, patience, courage, and alignment with unseen forces. Kneeling, he studied the inscriptions, feeling the rhythm of the stone pulse stronger with each observation. As he continued, he encountered signs of wildlife tracks in the soft soil, nests tucked between roots, and the fleeting glimpse of a deer moving silently through the trees. The custodes' lessons extended beyond physical obstacles. They included harmony with living beings, awareness of subtle interactions, and respect for the interconnectedness of the natural world. Aidan moved in quiet alignment, observing without intrusion, learning to interpret patterns in movement and behavior as part of the broader lessons embedded in the landscape. Afternoon brought a rise in elevation, a series of rolling hills leading toward a distant ridge. The vigil stone pulsed with urgency, guiding him through the open terrain. Each step required balance and foresight, reading the subtle cues of the environment, the firmness of soil, the slope of the hill, the placement of stones and fallen branches. The custodes had trained him to act with deliberate precision, allowing patience and observation to dictate his pace rather than the rush of the journey. Every careful decision reinforced the rhythm of harmony between mind, body, and the natural world. At the ridge, Aidan paused to take in the panorama. The valley below stretched endlessly, rivers winding through forests, hills rolling gently toward distant mountains. In the distance, a faint shimmer suggested structures hidden within the Trisa checkpoint or relic, perhaps designed to test the lessons he had accumulated. The vigil stone pulsed stronger as he surveyed the landscape, urging careful planning and the alignment of his movements with both intuition and observation. The custodes' teaching was clear. Success required attunement to the visible and invisible currents, the patterns woven through the land, and the rhythm of the stone guiding his awareness. Descending from the ridge, he entered a dense grove where ancient trees twisted skyward, roots forming natural barriers. The stone pulsed with subtle warning, guiding him around unstable areas and toward paths that were hidden but safer. Each step became a meditation, a practice of focus, patience, and quiet courage. Observing the environment with heightened awareness, he navigated fallen trees, small ravines, and undergrowth, feeling a profound connection to the forest and the lessons embedded within it. Evening approached, and Aidan reached a clearing where the ruins of a stone sanctuary lay. Overgrown with moss and vines, it appeared abandoned for centuries, yet the vigil stone pulsed with intensity as he approached. Kneeling within the central chamber, he traced carvings depicting alignment with celestial bodies, endurance through trials, and the cultivation of patience and courage. Hours passed as he absorbed the lessons, allowing the stone's pulse to synchronize with his heartbeat and breath. The custodes' instructions were both literal and metaphorical. The path forward demanded careful observation, internal discipline, and harmony with the forces both seen and unseen. As night fell, Aidan set up camp within the sanctuary, sitting upright as he had practiced since leaving the tower. The vigil stone pulsed gently, providing guidance and rhythm, allowing him to meditate and internalize the day's experiences. He reflected on the canyon, the obelisk, the lake crossing, and now the ridge and sanctuary, all pieces of a cumulative journey designed to train perception, patience, and courage. Each moment was a lesson, each step a practice in alignment with the custodes' philosophy. With the forest quieting into nocturnal rhythms, Aidan closed his eyes, allowing the stone to guide his awareness. The accumulated lessons resonated within him, forming a foundation of focus, intuition, and inner strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he felt ready. Strengthened by the trials of today and the careful integration of lessons learned, the custodes' path was arduous, demanding, and deeply transformative, preparing him for a journey that extended far beyond physical navigation into the realms of perception, patience, and courage. Dawn's pale light filtered through the sanctuary's broken roof, casting long, intricate shadows on the moss-covered floor. Aidan rose slowly, feeling the vigil stone's gentle pulse against his chest. Each night of upright meditation had honed his perception, patience, and mental resilience. Today promised to test these qualities in ways both subtle and profound, as the custody's design was never straightforward. Every challenge was layered, a combination of physical, mental, and spiritual trials, demanding awareness, focus, and courage. He stepped outside into the forest, the ground damp with morning dew, the scent of moss and wet earth sharp in the cool air. The path ahead was narrow, winding between gnarled trees and steep inclines. Each footfall required care, the vigil stone's pulse guiding him to the most stable placements. Aiden's senses were heightened, alert to every rustle of leaves, distant bird call, or shift in the wind. The custodies had trained him to move with a balance of intuition and observation, perceiving details most would overlook and interpreting them accurately. As he progressed, he came upon a series of low stone walls, remnants of a long-forgotten monastery. Moss and vines clung to the crumbling structures, yet subtle carvings remained visible, faint traces of ancient wisdom. Kneeling, Aiden traced the symbols with his fingers, letting the stone's vibrations sync with the patterns in the inscriptions. The markings spoke of endurance, clarity, and alignment, reinforcing lessons he had already encountered in the tower, the obelisk, and the sanctuary. The custody's guidance was cumulative. Each new sight built upon the understanding gleaned from previous experiences. Mid-morning, he entered a grove where the light barely penetrated the thick canopy. Roots twisted across the path, and fallen branches formed natural barriers. The vigil stone pulsed with subtle urgency, alerting him to hidden dangers. Aiden moved deliberately, testing each step with his staff and sensing the ground beneath him. The forest seemed alive, communicating in whispers of movement and sound. This was no mere passage. It was a living test of awareness, patience, and trust in the stone's guidance. Every obstacle became a lesson in observation, every careful maneuver an exercise in control and perception. By midday, the forest thinned, revealing a wide valley dotted with large boulders and scattered ruins. The air shimmered faintly in the heat, and the stone pulsed steadily, guiding him toward the central cluster of stones. Kneeling beside one particularly large boulder, Aiden noticed intricate carvings on its surface, depicting sequences of animals, stars, and abstract geometric patterns. These were not just decorations. They were instructions, maps of both terrain and principle, designed to train the mind to perceive hidden patterns, anticipate outcomes, and act with precision. Hours passed as he explored the valley, moving carefully between boulders, interpreting the carvings, and integrating the subtle signals from the vigil stone. He understood that the custody's lessons were never confined to a single location. They were embedded in the flow of the journey, encoded in every obstacle, every interaction with the environment, and every moment of stillness and reflection. Patience and perception were inseparable. Courage was required not just for physical risk, but for trust in the unseen guidance of the stone and the wisdom of those who had walked before him. Late afternoon brought the sight of a narrow canyon, its walls carved with faint reliefs of ancient faces, symbols of vigilance and endurance etched by hands long gone. Aiden entered carefully, feeling the stone's pulse increase as the space narrowed. The canyon floor was uneven, strewn with loose rocks, and the walls loomed overhead, casting deep shadows. Each step required deliberate calculation, each pause a moment of observation. The custodies had constructed these challenges not to intimidate, but to teach focus, awareness, and composure under pressure. He followed the canyon's winding path until he reached a small pool fed by an underground spring. The water shimmered with a faint phosphorescence, and the stone pulsed strongly, as if acknowledging the significance of the site. Kneeling, he placed the vigil stone near the edge of the pool, feeling its vibrations resonate with the gentle ripples. The carvings surrounding the pool depicted alignment with celestial cycles, patience through repetition, and endurance under uncertainty. Hours passed as Aidan meditated, tracing the carvings and allowing the pulse of the stone to guide his attention inward, merging his awareness with the rhythm of the natural and spiritual world around him. Evening fell, and Aidan set up camp near the pool, adopting his practiced upright posture. The stone's pulse remained a constant guide, providing subtle rhythm to his breathing and focus. He reflected on the day, the monastery ruins, the forest grove, the valley, and the canyon pool, lessons in perception, patience, and courage. Each site built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of cumulative knowledge and skill. The custody's teaching was methodical and deliberate, shaping not only his ability to navigate the world, but also his capacity to perceive subtle truths, act with wisdom, and endure challenges with composed determination. Night deepened, and the forest grew quiet, except for occasional nocturnal sounds. Aidan focused on the stone's pulse, feeling the alignment between mind, body, and environment deepen. The lessons absorbed today were integrated into his awareness, reinforcing the path of observation, patience, and courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, yet he felt prepared, fortified by the continuous interplay of perception and discipline, guided always by the steady, unwavering pulse of the vigil stone. The first rays of dawn spilled into the canyon, illuminating moss-covered rocks and glinting off the pool where Aidan had camped. He rose deliberately, keeping the vigil stone close against his chest. Its steady pulse, a reminder of the lessons learned and the challenges yet ahead. Today's journey would demand endurance and precision, as the custody's design escalated in complexity, blending physical obstacles with lessons in perception, patience, and courage. Each step, each decision, had to be deliberate, informed by both intuition and observation. He began by retracing his path through the canyon, moving slowly along narrow ledges and uneven terrain. The stone's pulse guided him subtly, highlighting areas of risk and signaling safe footholds and handholds. Aidan's senses were heightened, attuned not only to the visual cues, but also to the sounds of shifting stones, flowing water, and the whispers of wind through the canyon walls. The custodies had taught that awareness extended beyond sight. It was the integration of all sensory information, interpreted with patience and focus, that allowed successful navigation. Mid-morning, he reached a clearing where the ruins of a stone amphitheater lay partially buried under earth and vegetation. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of damp stone and wildflowers. Kneeling beside a partially intact wall, Aidan examined the carvings etched into the rock, depicting sequences of stars, animals, and abstract symbols. The vigil stone pulsed strongly, resonating with the patterns, suggesting that these markings contained encoded guidance principles of endurance, alignment, and perception that had to be internalized, not merely observed. Hours passed as he explored the amphitheater, tracing the carvings, meditating on the patterns, and letting the stone's subtle rhythm guide his attention. Each discovery revealed interconnected lessons, the importance of stillness in motion, patience in action, and the cultivation of courage through careful observation. The custodes' teachings were cumulative, layered across sites and trials, each reinforcing the previous lessons while preparing the mind for increasingly subtle and demanding challenges. By midday, Aidan had reached the edge of a narrow gorge, the river below tumbling over rocks with white froth. A series of boulders formed a precarious natural bridge across the chasm. The vigil stone pulsed with heightened intensity, alerting him to the need for extreme focus. He tested each boulder carefully, aligning his movements with the pulse, breathing deliberately, and sensing the stability beneath his feet. The crossing demanded complete awareness, as one misstep could result in a fall. This was not merely physical skill, it was the integration of courage, patience, and perception honed over weeks of custodes' guided trials. Once across, he entered a forested hillside where light filtered through dense branches, creating shifting patterns on the ground. Fallen logs and tangled roots formed natural obstacles, requiring careful movement. The vigil stone's pulse provided subtle guidance, indicating safe pathways and alerting him to hidden risks. Aidan observed every detail: the sway of branches, the placement of rocks, the sound of distant water. Each cue was part of the custodes' teaching, emphasizing the necessity of mindfulness, deliberate movement, and harmony with the environment. Afternoon brought him to a hidden glade where sunlight streamed through a break in the canopy, illuminating a circle of stones arranged with precise symmetry. At the center, a shallow basin carved into the earth reflected the sky above. Kneeling, Aidan placed the vigil stone in the basin, feeling its resonance intensify. The carvings on surrounding stones pulsed faintly, forming patterns that interacted with the stone's vibrations. Hours passed in quiet meditation, tracing the symbols and absorbing the lessons embedded in the geometry. The custodes' design emphasized the union of observation, reflection, and action, understanding that insight comes from alignment between the self and the surrounding world. Evening approached, and Aidan prepared a small camp in the glade. The vigil stone pulsed steadily, a comforting rhythm against his chest. Sitting upright, he reviewed the day's experiences: the canyon traversal, the amphitheater carvings, the gorge crossing, and the forested hillside. Each element had reinforced endurance, perception, and courage. The custodes' trials were cumulative, a continuous thread of instruction that intertwined physical skill with mental clarity and spiritual attunement. By internalizing these lessons, Aidan was shaping both his body and mind, preparing for challenges that demanded the integration of every skill learned so far. As night fell, the forest quieted, leaving only distant nocturnal calls and the gentle pulse of the vigil stone. Aidan focused inward, synchronizing his breath, heartbeat, and awareness with the rhythm of the stone. The custodes' teachings unfolded in his mind: patience, perception, courage, and harmony with unseen forces. The accumulated lessons of today reinforced the understanding that the journey was not just physical, but deeply transformative, shaping perception, discipline, and the ability to act with clarity and confidence. Tomorrow promised further trials, yet Aidan felt strengthened by the continuous interplay of observation, reflection, and deliberate action. The custodes' path, though arduous, was revealing a profound understanding that mastery of self and environment came from consistent awareness, patience, and courageous engagement with both the seen and unseen currents guiding the journey. Dawn arrived quietly over the glade, the early light catching on dew-drenched leaves and casting a soft glow over the stone circle. Aidan rose slowly, feeling the vigil stone's pulse steady against his chest. The lessons of the previous day's canyon crossings, amphitheater carvings, forested hills, and gorge traversals had shaped his focus and discipline. Today, the custodies had designed a series of challenges that would test both his intuition and his ability to harmonize movement with observation in a dynamic and unpredictable environment. He set out, moving carefully through the forest, every step deliberate and aligned with the pulse of the stone. Birds called softly from high branches, and the rustle of small mammals in the underbrush signaled that life was alert and responsive. The custodes' philosophy emphasized a deep connection with the environment, a blend of respect, observation, and patience. Aidan's senses absorbed subtle details, the slope of a fallen log, the texture of moss, the faint vibrations through the earth, allowing him to anticipate obstacles before encountering them. Mid-morning brought him to the edge of a rocky plateau. The terrain dropped sharply below, the river winding far beneath in a ribbon of silver. A narrow path led along the cliff's edge, unstable and littered with loose stones. The vigil stone pulsed with urgency, a reminder to synchronize breath, focus, and motion. Aidan inched forward, testing each foothold, moving slowly but deliberately. The lesson here was precision under pressure, patience in the face of risk, and the trust in the accumulated wisdom of both training and the stone itself. The path opened onto a secluded valley where sunlight streamed through breaks in the canopy, illuminating ruins of stone walls, long abandoned and overgrown. Kneeling beside the largest wall, Aidan traced carvings depicting cycles of animals, celestial symbols, and geometric patterns. The stone pulsed more strongly here, indicating the significance of this site. He spent hours meditating, interpreting the carvings, and integrating their lessons with the cumulative knowledge of previous trials. This was the custodes' method, layered instruction, each location reinforcing the last, teaching endurance, patience, perception, and inner courage. Afternoon led him to a meandering stream, its waters cold and clear, reflecting the sky above. The banks were uneven, strewn with stones and partially submerged roots. Aidan followed the flow, each step informed by observation and guided by the stone's subtle pulse. Small creatures scurried along the banks, and the rustle of leaves suggested the presence of unseen watchers. The custodes taught that understanding required perception not only of objects but of patterns, rhythms in nature, sequences of movement, and the interactions of the environment. Every detail mattered, and awareness became a form of alignment with both self and surroundings. Late afternoon brought the sight of a large, ancient tree, its trunk wide and gnarled, roots spreading like fingers across the forest floor. At its base, a shallow hollow contained a stone basin filled with water, carved with symbols similar to those he had seen at previous sacred sites. Kneeling, he placed the vigil stone in the basin. Its pulse resonated with the carvings, illuminating subtle patterns across the water and stone. Hours passed in meditative observation, the rhythm of the stone syncing with his breath and heartbeat. The custodes' teachings emphasized this intimate integration, the combination of patience, perception, courage, and reflection, applied in both action and stillness. As evening fell, Aidan prepared a small camp at the base of the great tree. Sitting upright, he reflected on the day. Canyon ledges, amphitheater carvings, forest paths, valley ruins, stream crossings, and now the ancient tree. Each trial had honed his focus and patience, reinforcing lessons of awareness and careful action. The custodes' design was cumulative, shaping not only skill and endurance, but the capacity for insight, strategic thinking, and inner composure. The pulse of the vigil stone was a constant companion, reminding him that every moment, every decision, and every observation contributed to mastery. Night enveloped the valley, the forest quiet except for occasional nocturnal calls and the gentle pulse of the stone. Aidan meditated, letting the lessons of the day and all previous experiences settle into his consciousness. Awareness, patience, and courage had become inseparable, forming a cohesive practice that extended beyond physical trials into mental and spiritual alignment. Tomorrow promised new challenges, yet he felt fortified, ready to meet them with confidence and deliberate focus. In the stillness, Aidan understood the custodes' ultimate teaching. Mastery came not from brute strength or rapid action, but from disciplined awareness, thoughtful observation, and the courage to act in harmony with both seen and unseen forces. Every site visited, every obstacle overcome, and every moment of reflection had been a step toward that understanding, shaping him into a person capable of perceiving subtle truths and responding with precision and calm. Morning light filtered softly through the canopy as Aidan rose beneath the ancient tree, the vigil stone steady against his chest. His nights of upright meditation had strengthened both body and mind, preparing him for the increasingly complex challenges laid out by the custodes. Today's trials would push the limits of his perception and patience, demanding careful observation, measured action, and a deep trust in the guidance of the stone. Each step he took was deliberate, each movement harmonized with the rhythm of his surroundings. He descended from the trees, hollow, into a dense grove, where the forest floor was thick with moss and fallen leaves. Every root and rock required careful navigation, and the vigil stone pulsed with subtle urgency, guiding him toward the safest paths. The custodes' training emphasized that true skill came not from speed, but from attunement, sensing patterns, interpreting subtle cues, and acting with awareness. Aidan's attention encompassed sound, sight, and the faint vibrations through the ground, allowing him to anticipate challenges before they appeared. By mid-morning, he arrived at a narrow gorge. Its steep walls rose sharply, and a series of precarious ledges formed a natural bridge across the vigil stone's pulse intensified, signaling the need for complete focus. He inched along the ledges, testing each foothold and synchronizing movement with the stone's rhythm. The custodes had designed this trial to cultivate courage in the face of risk, patience under pressure, and trust in accumulated knowledge. Every careful step reinforced the lessons learned over weeks of guided trials. Once across, Aidan entered a secluded valley, dotted with boulders, engraved with symbols and ancient inscriptions. The stone's pulse resonated strongly here, suggesting that this location held critical lessons. Kneeling beside one of the boulders, he traced the carvings and allowed the vigil stone to guide his interpretation. Symbols of endurance, vigilance, and alignment glowed faintly, communicating principles that went beyond physical movement. The necessity of patience, careful observation, and deliberate action in every aspect of life. Afternoon brought a challenge of navigation through a marshy area where hidden roots and shallow pools obscured safe passage. The stone pulsed subtly, indicating optimal routes. Aidan moved cautiously, testing every step balancing observation and action. The custody's teachings emphasized mindfulness in even mundane-seeming obstacles, the ability to perceive hidden patterns, anticipate consequences, and act with deliberate composure. The marsh was more than a physical challenge. It was a test of sustained awareness and the integration of perception, patience, and courage. Hours later, he reached a cliffside overlooking a wide river. Across the water, ruins of another custody's site could be glimpsed, partially obscured by mist. The vigil stone pulsed strongly, guiding his path along narrow, winding trails and across rocky terrain. Edan's focus remained absolute. The lessons of previous days' valley ruins, forested hills, canyon traversals, stream crossings were all integrated into his approach. Each challenge reinforced the cumulative training, observation, careful action, and trust in the subtle guidance of the stone. By evening, Aden arrived at the riverbank, where stepping stones allowed passage to the opposite side. The water rushed cold and swift, but the stone's rhythm guided him with exacting precision. Each step was measured, balanced, and synchronized with both his breath and the pulse of the vigil stone. Crossing safely, he felt a deep sense of alignment, a merging of awareness, patience, and courage that had become second nature. The custody's training was now internalized, a living practice manifest in movement, perception, and thought. He set up camp near the ruins across the river, sitting upright in the fading light. The vigil stone pulsed softly, providing a constant rhythm to focus his meditation. Reflecting on the day forest navigation, gorge traversal, valley exploration, marsh crossing, and river crossing, Aden appreciated the layered nature of the custody's lessons. Each location, obstacle, and experience had built upon the previous, cultivating a harmonious integration of mind, body, and perception. Night fell quietly, and the forest's nocturnal chorus filled the air. Aden meditated, synchronizing his breathing with the stone's pulse, allowing insights from the day to settle into consciousness. He realized that the custody's teachings went beyond physical skill or endurance. They cultivated a profound ability to perceive subtle truths, respond thoughtfully, and act with courage and precision. Each trial reinforced awareness, patience, and deliberate focus, shaping him into a person capable of navigating both the physical and mental landscapes of challenge. Tomorrow promised further trials, each likely more demanding than the last. Yet Aden felt strengthened, confident in the integration of lessons learned and the guidance of the vigil stone. The custody's path was arduous, designed not just to test the body, but to cultivate mental clarity, strategic perception, and inner resilience. Each experience had honed his ability to act decisively, harmoniously, and courageously. Whether facing visible obstacles or navigating the unseen currents that guided his journey. Dawn's first light revealed the ruins scattered across the far side of the river, partially shrouded in mist. Aden rose from his upright meditation, the vigil stone's pulse steady against his chest. Every night of reflection and focus had deepened his patience, sharpened his perception, and strengthened his courage. Today's path promised trials that would test the culmination of all he had learned. Physical agility, mental clarity, and intuitive awareness were required in equal measure. He began by navigating a series of uneven terraces leading up the hillside, each step deliberate and aligned with the stone's rhythm. Moss and loose stones demanded careful attention. Missteps could lead to injury or loss of progress. The custody's teachings emphasized that patience and observation were inseparable. Aidan attuned himself to the subtle cues of the environment, vibrations through the earth, shifts in wind, the distant call of birds, and even the faint resonance of the stone against his chest. Each cue informed his movement, his choices, and his understanding of the surrounding world. Mid-morning led him to a narrow passage flanked by towering stone columns, remnants of the ancient monastery. Carvings depicting constellations, animals, and abstract geometric patterns covered the surfaces, worn but discernible. Kneeling beside one of the columns, Aidan traced the carvings, letting the vigil stone's pulse guide his perception. These markings held layered instructions, lessons of endurance, clarity, and alignment, designed to cultivate awareness and sharpen intuition. He meditated for hours, internalizing the principles encoded in the carvings and allowing the subtle vibrations of the stone to synchronize with his breath and focus. By midday, he encountered a steep ravine with jagged rocks and a narrow natural bridge. The vigil stone pulsed urgently, signaling the need for extreme precision. Aidan approached cautiously, testing each foothold and moving in harmony with the pulse. The custodies had designed this challenge to teach courage under pressure, patience in motion, and reliance on both inner judgment and the subtle guidance of the stone. Each step reinforced lessons from prior trials, integrating physical skill with mental acuity and disciplined awareness. Crossing safely, Aidan entered a shaded grove filled with towering trees whose trunks bore faint carvings of abstract patterns and animal sequences. The stone's pulse resonated more strongly here, highlighting key areas for observation. Kneeling, he traced the carvings and absorbed their messages. Vigilance, patience, and the delicate balance between action and stillness. Hours passed in quiet reflection, the rhythm of the vigil stone synchronizing with his own, guiding him toward deeper insight and understanding. Afternoon brought a marshy expanse, dotted with shallow pools and tangled roots. The ground was unstable, requiring careful navigation. Aidan moved deliberately, guided by the subtle pulsing of the stone, testing every step and adjusting to the terrain. The custodi's philosophy emphasized mindfulness and deliberate engagement. Success was not in rushing through, but in observing, interpreting, and responding with precision and patience. Each careful maneuver became a practice in harmonizing perception, action, and courage. Late afternoon revealed a hidden alcove where a natural spring emerged from the rock, feeding a small reflective pool. Surrounding stones bore carvings of celestial cycles, animals, and geometric patterns. Kneeling beside the pool, Aidan placed the vigil stone on its surface. Its pulse intensified, resonating with the surrounding carvings, illuminating subtle patterns in the water's reflection. Hours passed in meditation, tracing symbols and integrating lessons from the cumulative experiences of valleys, forests, cliffs, marshes, and ravines. This site was a master lesson in synthesis, combining observation, patience, endurance, and courage into a harmonious practice. Evening approached, and Aidan set up camp near the spring. Sitting upright, he reflected on the day's journey and the layered instruction embedded in each trial. The custodi's training was cumulative and deliberate, teaching more than skill, it cultivated perception, awareness, disciplined patience, and the ability to act decisively under uncertainty. The vigil stone pulsed steadily against his chest, a rhythmic reminder of alignment between self, environment, and purpose. Night deepened, the forest around him quieting except for distant nocturnal calls and the gentle rhythm of the stone. Aidan meditated, allowing the lessons of today and previous days to settle into consciousness. He understood now that mastery was not in speed or brute strength, but in perception, patience, courage, and the ability to integrate insight with action. Each obstacle faced, each careful step, and each moment of reflection had built the foundation for profound awareness and measured courage. Tomorrow, the final trials awaited. Aidan felt prepared, fortified by the cumulative lessons and the constant guidance of the Vigil Stone. The Custodes path, though arduous, had shaped him into a person capable of observing subtle truths, responding with clarity, and acting with courage, patience, and precise judgment. The integration of these qualities would be tested one final time, requiring him to synthesize every skill learned into a single, cohesive practice of perception, endurance, and courage. The first light of dawn stretched across the final stretch of the Custodes path, illuminating jagged rocks, scattered ruins, and ancient stone markers. Aidan rose slowly, feeling the Vigil Stone pulse with a steady, insistent rhythm. The journey that had begun weeks ago through forests, valleys, ravines, cliffs, and marshes now converged toward its ultimate trial. Every lesson, every obstacle, every hour of reflection and meditation led to this moment, where observation, patience, and courage would be tested in their fullest form. He stepped carefully along a narrow ridge that overlooked a vast canyon, the terrain unstable and littered with sharp stones. The stone's pulse guided him to each secure foothold, its rhythm harmonizing with his breath and heartbeat. The Custodes design emphasized complete attunement, a balance between awareness, deliberate action, and courage under uncertainty. Each careful movement was reinforced by intuition sharpened over weeks of rigorous practice. Every sensory detail, the faint shift of wind, the texture of the stone, the distant call of birds was integral to safe passage and understanding the lesson embedded in the landscape. Mid-morning brought him to a cliffside plateau, scattered with massive boulders etched with ancient symbols and carvings. Kneeling beside one of the stones, he traced the inscriptions, noting depictions of celestial alignments, animals, and abstract patterns. The Vigil Stone pulsed strongly, its vibrations revealing hidden nuances within the carvings. Hours passed as he meditated, allowing the guidance embedded in the Custodes designs to permeate his awareness. This site, like all others, emphasized harmony between perception and action, stillness and movement, patience and courage. By midday, Aidan faced a narrow chasm spanned by a natural stone bridge. The drop below was dizzying, the surface uneven and treacherous. The stone pulsed urgently, a reminder that complete focus and deliberate motion were essential. He tested each step carefully, aligning movement with the rhythm of the stone and his own steady breath. Courage was not reckless here. It was calculated, guided by acute perception and trust in both his own judgment and the Custodes' cumulative lessons. Crossing successfully reinforced the integration of knowledge, intuition, and mental clarity built over weeks of relentless training. Once across, he entered a hidden grove where sunlight filtered through dense foliage, illuminating moss-covered stones engraved with complex patterns. Kneeling beside one particularly prominent boulder, he placed the Vigil Stone on its surface. Its pulse intensified, syncing with the carvings to reveal subtle sequences and connections previously hidden. Aidan spent hours absorbing the patterns, integrating lessons from canyon traversals, forest paths, valleys, marshes, and cliffside crossings. The custodes' methodology was clear. Mastery emerged from cumulative experience, deliberate observation, and measured action under diverse conditions. Afternoon led him to a narrow stream cutting through the valley. Its waters, clear but swift, stepping stones provided a passage across, yet one misstep could lead to disaster. The stone pulsed rhythmically, offering guidance in alignment and timing. Aidan moved deliberately, synchronizing each step with the stone's subtle vibrations and his own heightened awareness. Every motion reflected the integration of endurance, observation, patience, and courage, embodying the lessons he had internalized over the entirety of the custodes' journey. Late afternoon revealed the final landmark, an ancient sanctuary atop a hill, partially in ruins but radiating significance. The air was still, filled with the scent of earth, stone, and the faint trace of incense, long extinguished. Kneeling at the base of the sanctuary, Aidan placed the vigil stone in a central basin carved into the floor. Its pulse intensified dramatically, resonating with the intricate carvings that depicted celestial patterns, sequences of animals, and abstract symbols. For hours, he meditated, integrating all the lessons of endurance, perception, patience, and courage. The culmination of the custodes' training crystallized here, demanding the complete synthesis of skill, awareness, and insight. As evening descended, Aidan sat upright in the sanctuary, reflecting on the entirety of his journey. The custodes, trials, forests, valleys, ravines, cliffs, marshes, rivers, and sacred sites had been designed not merely to test physical skill, but to cultivate an integrated mastery of perception, patience, courage, and deliberate action. Each challenge built upon the last, creating a seamless progression that shaped him into a disciplined observer and thoughtful actor, capable of discerning subtle truths and responding with precision and composure. Night fell, and the sanctuary became a quiet refuge. The vigil stone pulsed gently against his chest, a constant reminder of alignment between body, mind, and environment. Aidan reflected on the profound lessons: endurance in the face of difficulty, patience through incremental progress, the integration of perception and action, and courage tempered by awareness. The custodes' teachings were no longer abstract. They were a living practice, manifested in movement, thought, and presence. In this final moment, he understood that mastery was not merely the result of completing obstacles, but of internalizing the philosophy embedded within each trial. Awareness, patience, courage, and disciplined observation were inseparable. Every step along the journey, from the first forest path to the sanctuary's peak, had been a deliberate cultivation of these qualities. The vigil stone, once a guide, had become an extension of his own consciousness, synchronizing insight, perception, and action. Aidan rose and stepped outside the sanctuary, feeling the night air cool on his skin. Stars shimmered overhead, echoing the celestial patterns he had traced throughout the trials. The custodes' path, arduous and unrelenting, had revealed not only the outer world's hidden patterns, but also the inner depths of his own awareness. He had emerged not merely as a survivor of challenges, but as a practitioner of the philosophy embedded in each obstacle: the integration of perception, patience, courage, and deliberate, aligned action. With the vigil stone steady in hand, he descended from the sanctuary, confident in the synthesis of lessons learned and the mastery of skills cultivated over the weeks. The custodes' journey was complete, leaving him transformed, fully attuned to the world around him, capable of perceiving subtle truths, and equipped with the discipline and courage to act with insight and precision. The trials were finished, but the wisdom he had internalized would guide him indefinitely, a foundation for navigating challenges yet unseen.